The espresso machine hissed behind me, releasing a plume of steam that carried the scent of dark roast and burnt sugar into the cramped space behind the counter. My fingers ached as I wiped down the chrome surface for what felt like the 100th time that morning, the repetitive motion a rhythm I'd perfected over 4 years of working at Bella Vita Cafe. The small Italian coffee shop tucked into a Brooklyn corner had become my sanctuary and my prison all at once. A place where I could hide in plain sight while raising my son alone. I adjusted my apron, the fabric pulling slightly across my lower back where an old injury from lifting too many supply boxes still bothered me on cold mornings like this one. December in New York had a way of seeping into your bones, making everything feel heavier, slower. I glanced at the clock above the pastry case. 7:15. Matteo would be waking up soon at my neighbor's apartment, probably asking for the dinosaur-shaped waffles I'd promised him last night. "Julia, table 6 needs a refill," and the couple at the window just sat down, Nicolau called from the kitchen doorway, his Portuguese accent thickening with the morning rush stress. He was a good man, patient with my occasional need to leave early for Matteo's doctor appointments, never asking too many questions about why a woman with an accounting degree chose to pour coffee for a living. I grabbed the carafe, its heat seeping through the handle into my palm as I navigated between tables. The cafe was filling up with the usual morning crowd, students from the community college down the street, construction workers grabbing quick fuel before their shifts, elderly Italian women who came for the cannoli and stayed for the gossip. I'd memorized their orders, their habits, their stories. It was easier to focus on other people's lives than to examine my own too closely. The couple at the window table looked out of place. The woman wore a designer coat that probably cost more than my monthly rent, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her phone screen. The man beside her had that particular stillness that came with power, the kind of presence that made the air around him feel charged. I'd learned to recognize that quality years ago, learned to avoid it. I approached their table with my practiced smile, the one that was friendly but not inviting, professional but not personal. "Good morning. What can I get started for you?" The woman barely glanced up. "Cappuccino, extra foam, with almond milk, and make sure the temperature is exactly 150 degrees. Last time it was scalding." I hadn't served her before, but I nodded anyway. "Of course. And for you, sir?" The man lifted his gaze from his phone, and something in my chest constricted. Not him, not them. But no, the features were wrong, the eyes a different shade. Just another wealthy businessman who probably owned half the buildings in this neighborhood. I exhaled slowly, forcing my shoulders to relax. "Espresso. Double shot." Right away. I retreated to the counter, my hand steadier than I expected as I prepared their drinks. 4 years had taught me how to function on autopilot, how to compartmentalize the past and present into neat, separate boxes that never touched. 4 years since I'd walked away from the only man I'd ever truly loved, because staying would have meant watching our future children grow up surrounded by violence and fear. 4 years since I'd discovered I was pregnant and made the hardest decision of my life. The steam wand shrieked as I frothed the almond milk, and I found myself remembering another morning, another cafe, a different version of myself. I'd been 28 then, newly graduated with my accounting degree, working at Bella Vita part-time while I searched for something better. Lorenzo had walked in on a Tuesday afternoon, his dark suit perfectly tailored, his presence commanding immediate attention from everyone in the room. But it was the way he'd looked at me, really looked, not through me the way most customers did, that had stopped my breath. "You have an opinion," he'd said, not asked when I'd served his espresso that first day. "I can see it in your eyes. You think I'm just another entitled businessman." I'd almost dropped the cup. Customers didn't usually want real answers. "I think you're a man who's used to getting what he wants," I'd replied, the words sharper than I'd intended. His smile had been slow, genuine. Smart. I like that. 3 months later, I'd moved into his penthouse in Manhattan, 6 months after that, I'd learned exactly what kind of business Lorenzo De Luca really conducted. And 2 years after our beginning, I'd left in the middle of the night with nothing but a suitcase and a secret growing inside me. "Order up for table 6. Fernanda's voice cut through my memories. She was the only other person working the morning shift, a single mother like me, though her kids were older. We'd formed a quiet alliance, covering for each other when life demanded we be in 2 places at once. I delivered the drinks to the window table, set them down with precise care, and was turning to leave when my phone buzzed in my apron pocket. I ignored it. Nicolau had a strict no-phones policy during shifts, but it buzzed again. And again. "Excuse me," I murmured to no one in particular, stepping back toward the counter. The phone continued its insistent vibration against my hip. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. "Is this Julia Romano?" A woman's voice. Professional. Urgent. "Yes. Who is this?" "This is Mount Sinai Hospital. We have your emergency contact information from your son's pediatrician. Ms. Romano. Matteo was brought into the emergency room about 20 minutes ago." The carafe slipped from my other hand, shattering against the tile floor in an explosion of glass and hot coffee. The cafe went silent. I couldn't hear anything past the roaring in my ears. Couldn't feel the scalding liquid soaking through my shoes. What happened? Is he... I couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't give voice to the terror clawing up my throat. "He's stable now, but he had a severe asthma attack. Your neighbor called 911 when his inhaler wasn't working. We need you to come in immediately. There are some complications we need to discuss." I was already moving, ripping off my apron, grabbing my coat from the hook by the kitchen. Nicolau appeared beside me, his face creased with concern. "Julia." "What?" "My son." "Hospital. I have to go." He pressed his car keys into my hand without hesitation. "Go. Don't worry about anything here." The drive to Mount Sinai was a blur of traffic lights and horn blasts and prayers to a God I wasn't sure I believed in anymore. The parking garage, the elevator, the emergency room intake desk, all of it passed in fragments, disconnected moments strung together by pure maternal panic. "Matteo Romano De Luca," I gasped out to the nurse at the desk. "My son, he was brought in. Room 7 through those doors. Dr. Ferreira is with him." I ran. The antiseptic smell of the hospital filled my lungs, so different from the coffee and pastry scents I'd been breathing just minutes ago. Room 7. There he was. My baby. My entire world. Small and pale against the white sheets with an oxygen mask covering half his face. His dark curls were matted with sweat, his chest rising and falling in a rhythm that looked too fast, too shallow. Matteo. I was at his bedside, taking his small hand in mine, checking his pulse the way I'd learned to do in the early days of his diagnosis. "Mama's here, baby. I'm right here." His eyes fluttered open, brown like his father's, and found mine. He tried to smile behind the mask. "Ms. Romano." A woman in a white coat approached, her expression carefully neutral in that way doctors had when the news wasn't good. "I'm Dr. Nadia Ferreira. Your son's asthma attack was more severe than the ones you've described in his medical history. His oxygen levels dropped dangerously low before the paramedics arrived." I nodded, not trusting my voice. "We've stabilized him, but I'm recommending we keep him for observation for at least 24 hours. I also think it's time to consider more aggressive treatment options. The medication he's on now isn't providing adequate control." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Ms. Romano, some of these treatments are quite expensive, even with insurance. I want to make sure we discuss all your options." The words hit like physical blows. Expensive. Options. The careful euphemisms for, "Can you afford to keep your son alive?" My savings account had maybe $3,000. My health insurance through the cafe was basic at best. I'd been so careful, so frugal, saving every spare dollar for emergencies just like this one. But I'd calculated for smaller emergencies, urgent care visits, maybe a brief hospital stay. Not aggressive treatments, not prolonged care. Whatever he needs, I said, the words automatic even as my mind raced through impossible math. I'll find a way. Whatever he needs. Dr. Ferreira's expression softened slightly. We'll work with you on a payment plan. For now, let's focus on getting him stable enough to go home. He should sleep for a while. The medications we gave him will make him drowsy. She left me alone with Matteo, and I sank into the chair beside his bed, my hand never leaving his. He looked so small. 4 years old, and he'd already inherited so much from me. My stubborn independence, my sharp tongue, my brown eyes. And from his father, that straight nose, those dark curls, that fierce determination. Lorenzo didn't know. Had never known. I'd made sure of it. I pulled out my phone with my free hand, needing to do something. To fix something. Maybe I could pick up extra shifts. Maybe Fernanda knew of other part-time work. Maybe I could finally use that accounting degree, find a real job with real benefits, even though the idea of leaving Matteo in daycare for longer hours made my throat tighten. The phone buzzed with a text. Unknown number again. Your ex and the baby need you now. I stared at the screen, my mind struggling to process the words. My ex. There had only been one ex that mattered, one relationship serious enough to count. But that was impossible. Lorenzo didn't know about Matteo. No one from that life knew. I'd been so careful, changed my number, moved to a different borough, used only my mother's maiden name on all of Matteo's documents. Another text appeared. Room 7, Mount Sinai. She won't ask for help, but the kid needs more than she can give him alone. Ice slid down my spine. Someone knew. Someone had been watching. Someone had sent this message to... The door to the hospital room opened. I looked up, and my entire world tilted sideways. Lorenzo De Luca stood in the doorway, older than I remembered, broader through the shoulders, with threads of silver in his dark hair that hadn't been there 4 years ago. He wore a black coat over a charcoal suit, the fabric expensive and perfectly tailored. His presence filled the small room the way it always had. Commanding, magnetic, impossible to ignore. But it was his face that destroyed me. The shock written across his features as his gaze moved from me to the small figure in the hospital bed. The way his expression shifted from confusion to dawning comprehension to something raw and devastating that I'd never seen on Lorenzo De Luca's face before. Julia. My name came out rough, almost broken. What? He couldn't finish. His eyes were locked on Matteo, taking in every detail, the dark curls, the shape of his face, the small hand that rested in mine. I watched him do the math, watched the realization hit him like a physical blow. He's 4, Lorenzo said. And it wasn't a question. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. 4 years of careful distance, of protective secrets, of building a life where Lorenzo De Luca was just a memory, all of it crumbling in the space of a heartbeat. Lorenzo, 4 years old. His voice was still quiet, but something dangerous had crept into it now. You've had my son for 4 years, and you never told me. It wasn't like that. The words came out defensive, sharp. You don't understand. Then explain it to me, Julia. He moved further into the room, and I saw Federico Costa hovering in the hallway beyond, Lorenzo's eternal shadow. Explain how you walk out of my life, disappear completely, and raise my child without ever once thinking I deserved to know. My hand tightened protectively around Matteo's. You want to talk about deserving? You want to discuss what our children would have deserved, growing up in your world? watching their father conduct business that sometimes ended with people disappearing, learning to accept violence as normal. So you decided for both of us. His jaw was tight, every word clipped. Decided I didn't get a choice. Decided I didn't get to be a father. I decided to protect him. The words came out fiercer than I intended, years of justification crystallizing into certainty. I decided that my son wouldn't grow up afraid, wouldn't have to learn which questions never to ask, wouldn't end up like... I stopped myself, but we both knew how that sentence ended. Wouldn't end up like you. The silence stretched between us, heavy with everything we'd never said, everything we'd left unfinished 4 years ago. Matteo stirred in his sleep, a small sound escaping around the oxygen mask, and both Lorenzo and I immediately looked at him, unified in concern despite everything else. What's wrong with him? Lorenzo's voice had changed, the anger buried under something else. Fear, maybe. Why is he here? Severe asthma attack. I kept my eyes on Matteo's face, unable to look at Lorenzo. He's stable now, but it was bad. Really bad. He needs better treatment, better medication. But I didn't finish, didn't need to. The but hung in the air between us, loaded with all the practical realities of raising a child alone on a waitress's salary, whatever he needs. Lorenzo's words echoed my own from earlier, but when he said them, they carried a weight mine hadn't. The weight of unlimited resources, of power, of the ability to actually deliver on that promise. Whatever treatment, whatever doctors, whatever it takes, I'll handle it. No. The word came out automatically, defensive. We don't need your money, Lorenzo. We're fine. His laugh was bitter. Fine? Your son is in a hospital bed because his medication wasn't working. The doctor talked to you about payment plans. Don't insult both of us by pretending you're fine. Heat rushed to my face. I've managed for 4 years without... You shouldn't have had to manage at all. The words burst out of him, louder than intended. He caught himself, glanced at Matteo to make sure he hadn't woken him, then continued more quietly. You shouldn't have had to do any of this alone, Julia. That's on you. You made that choice. But it's also on me for not being the kind of man you could trust with this. The admission startled me into silence. Lorenzo De Luca didn't do vulnerability, didn't do regret. At least the Lorenzo I'd known 4 years ago hadn't. Who sent you the message? I asked, needing to understand. How did they even know? I don't know yet. His expression hardened. But I'm going to find out. Someone's been watching you, watching him. That's not acceptable. The possessiveness in his voice sent a shiver through me. 4 years hadn't changed everything then. Lorenzo still thought in terms of protection and control, of handling threats and managing risks. We're not yours to protect, I said. But the words came out weaker than I intended. His eyes met mine finally, and the intensity there stole my breath. He's my son. That makes him mine to protect whether you like it or not. And you. He paused, something complicated crossing his face. You're the mother of my child. Like it or not, Julia, we're connected now. Forever. The forever hung in the air between us, as permanent and inescapable as the small boy sleeping in the hospital bed who had both our faces, both our stubbornness, both our hearts. The next morning arrived with pale winter sunlight filtering through the hospital room's narrow window. I hadn't slept. Couldn't sleep, with Lorenzo stationed in the chair on the opposite side of Matteo's bed like some kind of designer-suited sentinel. He'd refused to leave, despite my protests, despite Dr. Ferreira's gentle suggestion that perhaps one parent at a time would be less disruptive to the patient. Lorenzo had simply looked at her with those dark, uncompromising eyes and said, I've missed 4 years. I'm not missing another minute. Matteo had woken twice during the night, confused and frightened by the oxygen mask, the beeping monitors, the unfamiliar surroundings. Each time I'd soothed him with soft words and gentle touches, singing the Italian lullaby my grandmother had taught me, the one about the stars watching over brave little boys. And each time, I'd felt Lorenzo's gaze on us, absorbing every detail, learning the rhythms of a child he'd never known existed. Now, with morning light exposing the exhaustion on both our faces, Matteo was finally awake and alert enough to notice the stranger in the room. "Mama, who's that?" His voice was small, muffled by the mask, his brown eyes, so like his father's, tracking Lorenzo with the cautious curiosity of a 4-year-old encountering something new and potentially threatening. I'd known this moment would come, had played out a dozen versions of it in my mind during the sleepless hours. None of them felt adequate now. "This is..." I started, then stopped. "What was he?" "Your father felt too monumental. A friend felt like a betrayal. This is Lorenzo. He's someone who cares about you very much." Matteo's brow furrowed in that way that meant he was processing, analyzing. He'd always been sharp, observant beyond his years. "Why?" Simple question, impossible answer. Lorenzo shifted forward in his chair, and I tensed automatically, some protective instinct making me want to position myself between them. But he moved slowly, carefully, his whole body language different than I'd ever seen it. Softer, almost uncertain. "Because you're important," Lorenzo said, his voice gentler than I'd known it could be. "And because I should have been here from the beginning. That's my fault, not your mama's. But I'm here now, if that's okay with you." Matteo considered this with the seriousness only a 4-year-old could muster when evaluating whether to accept a stranger into his small world. "Do you like dinosaurs?" The question was so absurdly normal that I almost laughed. Lorenzo's expression flickered with something that might have been relief. "I don't know much about them, but I'd like to learn, if you want to teach me." "I know all the dinosaurs." Matteo's voice gained strength, the topic more interesting than the scary hospital equipment. "T-Rex is the most famous, but Mama says the most dangerous was actually Velociraptor because they hunted in packs and were smart." "Your mama sounds like she knows what she's talking about." "She always does." Matteo stated it as simple fact, and I felt something crack open in my chest. Dr. Ferreira chose that moment to enter, her presence breaking the fragile connection forming between father and son. She checked Matteo's vitals, adjusted his medications, made notes on her tablet. I watched her every movement, trying to read her expression for signs of good news or bad. "He's responding well to the treatment," she said finally, offering a small smile. "I think we can switch him to a nasal cannula instead of the mask, which will be more comfortable. And if everything stays stable, you might be able to take him home this evening." Relief flooded through me so intensely I had to grip the bed rail for support. "Thank you. Thank you so much." However, Dr. Ferreira's tone shifted, becoming more serious. "We do need to discuss the ongoing treatment plan. The medications that will keep him stable are expensive, and he'll need regular monitoring from a specialist. I've prepared some information about payment options and financial assistance programs. Send the bills to me." Lorenzo stood, pulling a business card from his wallet and extending it to the doctor. "All of them. Whatever he needs, whatever the cost. And I want him to see the best pediatric pulmonologist in New York. Can you recommend someone?" Dr. Ferreira took the card, her eyebrows raising slightly as she read it. Whatever she saw there changed her demeanor subtly, a new wariness entering her expression. "Mr. DeLuca. Of course. I'll have my assistant compile a list of specialists this morning. Today," Lorenzo corrected. "I want him scheduled for this week." "Lorenzo, we can't just..." I started, but he cut me off with a look. "Yes, we can. And we will." He turned back to the doctor. "Whatever paperwork needs to be signed, have it ready. I'll be covering all medical expenses going forward." After Dr. Ferreira left, I waited only until the door closed before turning on him. You can't just walk in here and take over everything. I'm his mother. I make the decisions about his care, then make better ones. The words were harsh, deliberately so. Your pride isn't worth his health, Julia. You know that. This isn't about pride. Isn't it? He moved closer, his voice dropping lower. You'd rather struggle, rather let him go without the best care available than accept help from me. If that's not pride, what is it? I wanted to argue, wanted to throw his own words back at him. But the truth was more complicated than pride. It was about control, about the independence I'd fought so hard to build, about not becoming one more person in Lorenzo's orbit who owed him something. What do you want from this? I asked instead. You swoop in, pay for everything, and then what? You think that makes you his father? Being a parent isn't about money, Lorenzo. It's about being there for the small moments, the ordinary ones. It's about knowing which dinosaur is his favorite, what songs calm him down, how he takes his waffles. Money doesn't buy that. Something flickered across his face. Hurt, maybe, or recognition. You're right. It doesn't. But it does buy him the medicine that keeps him breathing, Julia. And right now, that's what he needs most. I turned away, unable to hold his gaze, unable to admit he was right. Matteo had drifted back to sleep, his small chest rising and falling more easily now without the mask. He looked peaceful, innocent, unaware of the complex web of obligation and resentment and old love spinning around him. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Fernanda, checking in, asking if I needed anything. I typed back a quick response, grateful for her steady friendship, for the normalcy of someone outside this impossible situation. Who's watching him when you're at work? Lorenzo asked, his tone deceptively casual. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen. She's retired, loves kids, and Matteo adores her. And when you're working nights? Weekends? I don't work nights. I do the morning shift so I can be with him in the afternoons and evenings. What about your accounting degree? You went through 4 years of school for that. The question landed like a dart in a vulnerable spot. The cafe has benefits, health insurance, flexible hours. Accounting firms don't care that I need to leave when my son has a doctor's appointment. Lorenzo was quiet for a long moment. You sacrificed your career for him. I didn't sacrifice anything. I made a choice. The distinction mattered to me, even if it wouldn't to him. Every parent makes choices about what matters most. And you chose to do it alone. There was no accusation in his voice now, just something that sounded almost like wonder. You could have found me, Julia. Could have asked for help. But you didn't. I couldn't. The words came out before I could stop them. Lorenzo, your life, the things you do, I couldn't bring a child into that. I couldn't risk him growing up around violence, around danger, around all the things you refuse to acknowledge are wrong. You think I don't know? His voice hardened. You think I don't understand exactly what my world is? I've always known, Julia. The difference is, I accepted it. You didn't. Because I wanted better. For him, for us, for any future we might have had. I finally turned to face him, let him see the pain I'd been carrying for 4 years. I loved you, Lorenzo. God, I loved you so much it terrified me, but I loved the idea of our children more, and I knew I couldn't have both. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush us both. In the hallway beyond, I could hear the ordinary sounds of a hospital, rolling carts, distant conversations, the ping of elevator bells. Normal life continuing while ours fractured and reformed into something unrecognizable. Lorenzo's phone rang, the sound sharp in the quiet room. He glanced at it, jaw tightening. I need to take this. Federico will stay here with you. I don't need a bodyguard. Yes, you do. He was already moving toward the door. Someone sent me that message, which means someone's been watching you. Watching Matteo. Until I know who and why, you don't go anywhere without protection. He was gone before I could argue, leaving me alone with my sleeping son and the crushing weight of a reality I'd been avoiding for 4 years. Lorenzo De Luca wasn't just going to write a check and disappear. He was inserting himself into our lives with the same calculated determination he brought to everything else. Federico appeared in the doorway minutes later, his massive frame somehow managing not to look threatening, despite the obvious bulge of a weapon under his jacket. Ma'am, boss asked me to keep an eye on things. I'm fine, Fred. You can wait outside. With respect, ma'am, that's not how this works. He positioned himself near the window, his gaze constantly scanning the hallway beyond. Someone's taking an interest in you and the boy. Until we know who, you're under protection whether you like it or not. The casual certainty in his voice reminded me so sharply of Lorenzo that I almost laughed. 4 years, and nothing had really changed. Lorenzo still thought in terms of control and protection, of problems to be managed and threats to be eliminated. Except now, I wasn't just Lorenzo's ex-girlfriend who'd walked away. I was the mother of his child, and in Lorenzo's world, that made me something far more complicated and far more permanent. My phone buzzed again. Not Fernanda this time. Another unknown number. You did the right thing, telling him. The boy needs his father. But you need to be careful, Julia. Not everyone is happy about this reunion. Some of Lorenzo's enemies would love to know he has a son. Ice flooded my veins. I looked up at Federico, who was already moving toward me, his expression sharp with alertness. What is it? I showed him the message. His face darkened as he read. Then he was on his phone, speaking in rapid Italian to someone I assumed was Lorenzo. Within seconds, Lorenzo was back in the room, his expression thunderous. Let me see it. I handed him the phone, watched as he read the message once, twice, his jaw growing tighter with each word. This is why I left, I said quietly. This. Right here. Our son is 4 years old, and he's already a target because of who you are. He's a target because someone made him one by sending me that first message. Lorenzo's voice was cold, controlled, the temperature of his anger more frightening than any explosion would have been. Someone wanted me to know about Matteo. Someone wants me distracted, vulnerable, and they used my son to do it. The possessiveness in those words, my son, sent a shiver through me. In less than 24 hours, Lorenzo had gone from not knowing Matteo existed to claiming him with absolute certainty. What are you going to do? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Lorenzo looked at me, and in his eyes I saw the man I'd fallen in love with and the man I'd fled from, all tangled together in a way that made it impossible to separate one from the other. I'm going to find out who's behind this, and then I'm going to make sure they understand that my son, our son, is completely off limits. Whatever it takes. Whatever it takes. The phrase that had defined Lorenzo's approach to everything, the philosophy that had driven us apart. Now it was being deployed to protect the child we'd made together, and I didn't know whether to be grateful or terrified. Probably both. Matteo stirred, his eyes opening slowly, still clouded with sleep and medication. Mama. I was at his side instantly, smoothing his dark curls back from his forehead. Right here, baby. I'm right here. His gaze drifted past me to Lorenzo, then to Federico's imposing figure by the window. Why are there so many people? They're friends, I said, the lie tasting bitter. They're here to help keep you safe. Safe from what? 4 years old, and already asking the questions I'd hoped he'd never have to consider. I looked at Lorenzo, saw my own fear reflected in his expression, and knew with crushing certainty that my careful plans to keep Mateo separate from this world had just shattered completely. "From anything bad," I answered finally. "You don't need to worry about it. That's what grown-ups are for." Mateo seemed satisfied with this answer, his attention already shifting to more immediate concerns. "Can I have my dinosaurs? And juice?" "The nurses said you can have liquids now that you're feeling better. Let me go get you some juice." I started to stand, but Lorenzo was already moving toward the door. "I'll get it. You stay with him." It should have annoyed me, the way he assumed control so easily. Instead, I felt something more complicated, a reluctant gratitude mixed with the old resentment of needing help I'd sworn I'd never ask for. After he left, Federico spoke quietly from his position by the window. "For what it's worth, ma'am, I've known the boss for 15 years. I've never seen him like this." "Like what?" "Scared." He glanced at Mateo, something almost soft entering his expression. "He's always been careful, always calculated every risk. But this, a son he didn't know about, threats he can't immediately identify. It's got him off balance, makes him dangerous in a different way. Should that comfort me? Maybe." Federico's gaze returned to the hallway, vigilant. "Maybe not. But I'll tell you this. There's not a person alive stupid enough to try to hurt that boy now that the boss knows he exists. Whatever else Lorenzo De Luca is, he protects what's his." The words settled over me like a prophecy or a curse, impossible to tell which. Lorenzo returned with juice and a selection of snacks he'd somehow procured from the hospital cafeteria, and I watched him interact with Mateo. Awkward, but trying, clearly out of his depth, but refusing to retreat. This was my new reality, not the careful separation I'd maintained for 4 years, but something far more complicated. Lorenzo was in our lives now, and every instinct I'd developed for protection and independence was screaming that this was dangerous, that I'd just invited the very threat I'd worked so hard to avoid. But as I watched Mateo's face light up when Lorenzo produced a small toy dinosaur from his coat pocket, a T-Rex, green and fierce, I couldn't deny the other truth. My son had just met his father, and despite everything, despite all my fears and reservations, there was something in Mateo's expression that looked almost like hope, and that terrified me more than any threat ever could. We brought Mateo home that evening in Lorenzo's car, not the sleek black sedan I remembered, but a different vehicle entirely, one with tinted windows and what I suspected was bulletproof glass. Federico drove while Lorenzo sat in the back with us, his attention never wavering from Mateo, who was entranced by the leather seats and the way the city lights streaked past the darkened windows. "It's like we're invisible," Mateo said, pressing his small hand against the glass. "Like secret agents." "Something like that," Lorenzo replied, and I caught the ghost of a smile on his face before it vanished behind his usual mask of control. My apartment in Brooklyn was exactly as I'd left it. Small, cluttered with Mateo's toys and my attempts to create a cheerful space on a limited budget. The building itself was old but well-maintained, the kind of place where neighbors looked out for each other, and Mrs. Chen down the hall knew everyone's business. I'd felt safe here, anonymous. Just another single mother struggling to make ends meet. Now, watching Lorenzo take in the narrow hallway, the worn carpet, the water stain on the ceiling that the landlord kept promising to fix, I felt the gap between our worlds yawn open like a chasm. "This is it," I said, unlocking the door with a key that stuck slightly, requiring the specific jiggle-and-turn motion I'd perfected over 4 years. "It's not much, but it's ours." Lorenzo didn't respond immediately. He was too busy cataloging every detail, the location of the windows, the lack of a security system, the flimsy chain lock that wouldn't stop anyone determined to enter. I could practically see him calculating vulnerabilities, identifying weaknesses, planning improvements I hadn't asked for and didn't want. Mateo, oblivious to the tension crackling between the adults, immediately headed for his toy box in the corner of the living room. "Can I show Lorenzo my dinosaur collection? After you take your medicine," I reminded him, already moving toward the kitchen where I kept his prescriptions organized in a weekly pill organizer. "Then you can show him whatever you want." The routine was familiar, comforting in its predictability. Mateo's inhaler first, then the new medications Dr. Ferreira had prescribed, carefully measured and administered while I watched to ensure he swallowed everything. Lorenzo observed from the doorway, his presence too large for the small kitchen, his expensive coat looking absurdly out of place against my second-hand furniture. "You do this every day?" he asked quietly. "Twice a day, morning and night. Sometimes more if he's having a bad day." I finished with the medications and helped Mateo down from the kitchen chair. "Okay, baby, you can play for a little while, but then it's bedtime. You need to rest." Mateo scampered off to his toys, leaving Lorenzo and me alone in the narrow kitchen. The silence stretched between us, heavy with everything we hadn't said, everything we needed to address. "We have to talk," I said finally. "Really talk. Not just react to whatever crisis is happening in the moment." "Agreed." He moved further into the kitchen, somehow finding space in the cramped area without crowding me. But maybe not here, not where he can overhear. He was right, of course. Whatever we needed to discuss, custody, finances, the threats against our son, none of it was appropriate for 4-year-old ears. "Mrs. Chen can watch him for an hour. There's a coffee shop 2 blocks away." 20 minutes later, we were seated across from each other in a booth at the back of an all-night diner, the kind of place where the coffee was terrible, but nobody bothered you if you needed to sit for hours. Lorenzo looked as out of place here as he had in my apartment, his tailored suit and expensive watch drawing curious glances from the late-night crowd. "You want to know why I left?" I said, not waiting for him to ask. "You want me to explain 4 years of silence, 4 years of keeping Mateo hidden. So I'll tell you, but you have to promise to actually listen instead of just waiting for your turn to argue." He nodded once, his expression unreadable. "I'm listening." I wrapped my hands around the warm coffee cup, needing something to anchor me as I dragged up memories I'd worked hard to bury. "Do you remember the night I found your shirt? The one you'd tried to hide in the back of the closet?" His jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. "It was covered in blood, Lorenzo. Not a little blood. Soaked through, like whoever had been wearing it had been standing in the middle of something terrible. And when I asked you about it, you looked me straight in the eye and told me it was from a nosebleed." The memory still made my throat tight. "You lied to me like I was stupid, like I couldn't recognize the difference between a nosebleed and whatever actually happened." "It wasn't something you needed to know about," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "It was handled. That's exactly the problem." I leaned forward, needing him to understand. Everything was always handled. Problems disappeared. People who crossed you stopped being problems, and you wanted me to just accept it, to live in your beautiful penthouse and wear your expensive jewelry and never ask questions about where any of it came from. I never lied to you about what I did. You never told me the truth either, not the whole truth. I took a breath, steadying myself. "That night, the night I found the shirt, I also overheard your phone call, the one about Marco Santini." Lorenzo went very still, the kind of stillness that in another context might have been terrifying. "What exactly did you hear?" "Enough to know that Marco Santini disappeared 3 days later, that his wife filed a missing persons report that went nowhere, that his business, the one he'd refused to sell to you, ended up in your possession anyway." My voice dropped lower. "That his 10-year-old daughter lost her father, and nobody could prove why. Marco Santini was involved in things you don't understand." "I don't want to understand." The words came out fiercer than I intended. "That's the point, Lorenzo. I didn't want to understand the justifications, the rationalizations, the ways you made it all seem reasonable. I wanted out before I became someone who accepted it, who stopped seeing it as wrong. He was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes searching my face. And then you found out you were pregnant, 2 weeks after I left. I took the test 3 times because I couldn't believe it. I remembered that moment with painful clarity, sitting on the bathroom floor of a cheap motel, staring at 3 positive pregnancy tests, understanding that my life had just become infinitely more complicated. And I had a choice to make. Come back. Tell you. Try to build something that I'd already decided was impossible. Or start over, alone, and give our child a chance at something different. You chose alone. I chose safety. I chose normal. I met his gaze steadily. I chose to raise my son without him having to wonder if his father was a murderer. The word hung between us like a blade, sharp and unforgiving. Lorenzo's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes went cold and distant. Is that what you think I am? I think you've done things that most people would call murder, even if you call it business. The truth tasted bitter, but I'd carried it too long to soften it now. I think you operate outside the law, that you hurt people when they get in your way, and that you justify it all with your code and your loyalty and your family honor. And I think if Matteo grows up in your world, he'll either become like you, or he'll be destroyed by what you are. Or he'll be protected by what I am, Lorenzo countered, his voice low and intense. You think your little apartment in Brooklyn is safe? You think working at a cafe and scraping by on tips is giving him a better life? Julia, I've been in New York for less than 24 hours, and I've already identified 6 different ways someone could get to him. Your building has no real security. Your neighbor is an elderly woman who couldn't stop anyone determined to get past her. You walk the same route to work every day, at the same time, making yourself predictable. You're trying so hard to be invisible that you've made yourself vulnerable. His words landed like stones, each one sinking into my carefully maintained illusion of safety. We've been fine for 4 years. You've been lucky for 4 years, he corrected. But luck runs out, especially when someone decides to make you a target. And Julia, someone already has. Those messages weren't random. Someone wanted me to know about Matteo, and they're not done yet. Then leave us alone. The desperation in my voice embarrassed me, but I couldn't hide it. If we're targets because of you, then walk away. Forget you saw us. Pretend you never got that message. Lorenzo's laugh was harsh, devoid of humor. You think that's possible? You think I can just forget I have a son? And even if I could, even if I was willing to abandon my own child the way you wanted me to, the damage is already done. Someone knows. And if they told me, they can tell anyone else who might want to use Matteo against me. The weight of his logic crushed my remaining arguments. He was right, had been right from the beginning. The moment someone sent that first message, my careful walls had crumbled, and there was no rebuilding them. So what happens now? I asked, the question coming out smaller than I intended. Lorenzo leaned back in the booth, his expression calculating. Now we negotiate. You wanted normal for Matteo. I want him safe and acknowledged as my son. We need to find somewhere those 2 things can coexist. They can't. That's the whole point. They have to, he interrupted, his voice hard with certainty. Because the alternative is you continuing to raise him alone in that vulnerable apartment, while whoever sent those messages decides what to do next. Is that what you want, Julia? To gamble with his safety because you're too proud to accept help? It's not about pride. Then what is it about? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you'd rather risk everything than admit you need me. The accusation stung, because it carried a grain of truth. I had built my entire identity over the past 4 years around not needing Lorenzo De Luca, around proving I could do it all myself. The thought of surrendering that independence felt like losing some essential part of who I'd become. I need to think, I said finally. This is too much, too fast. 24 hours ago, you didn't know Matteo existed. Now you want to reorganize our entire lives. 24 hours ago, I didn't know someone was threatening my son. Lorenzo's voice softened slightly, becoming almost gentle. I'm not asking you to trust me, Julia. I know I haven't earned that, maybe never will. But I am asking you to let me protect him. Let me be his father in whatever way you'll allow. Let me give him the security and safety that you can't provide on your own. The words were carefully chosen, designed to appeal to my maternal instincts while avoiding the raw nerve of my pride. Lorenzo had always been good at negotiation, at finding the leverage points that would move people toward his desired outcome. What exactly are you proposing? I asked warily. Move into my building. I own a property in Manhattan with multiple apartments. You and Matteo take one. 3 bedrooms, modern kitchen, actual security. I pay for everything, including his medical care and whatever else he needs. You keep your independence, your own space. But he's safe, and I'm close enough to actually be part of his life. I wanted to refuse immediately, to tell him there was no way I'd accept such an arrangement. But the practical part of my brain, the part that had been worrying about how to afford Matteo's new medications, wouldn't let me dismiss it so easily. And what do you get out of this arrangement? I asked. Besides proximity to your son. Lorenzo's expression shifted, becoming something more vulnerable than I'd ever seen from him. I get to know him, to be there when he wakes up from nightmares, to teach him things, to watch him grow. I get to be his father, Julia, not just financially. Actually be there, in his life, consistently. And when he gets old enough to ask questions about what you do, about your business, then we answer them together. Honestly. He held my gaze. I won't lie to him the way you think I lied to you. But I also won't disappear from his life to protect him from uncomfortable truths. That's the difference between us. You think ignorance is protection. I think knowledge is power. We stared at each other across the scarred diner table. 2 people who had once planned a future together, now negotiating the terms of a shared present we'd never imagined. I need time, I said finally. I can't make this decision right now, tonight, while everything is still chaotic. You have until tomorrow. His tone left no room for negotiation. Because whether you accept my help or not, I'm putting security on you and Matteo. I'm making sure whoever's watching you understands they're now watching someone under my protection. The only question is whether you'll do that from your vulnerable apartment or from a place where I can actually ensure your safety. That's not a negotiation. That's an ultimatum. No, Lorenzo said, his voice quiet but absolute. An ultimatum would be me taking legal action to establish paternity and custody rights, which I will do if I have to. This is me offering you a choice before I stop offering choices. So decide, Julia. Tomorrow. He stood, pulling cash from his wallet and leaving it on the table. Far more than our coffee cost, as usual. Federico will drive you home. I have some things to handle tonight. What kind of things? The kind you don't want to know about. He paused at the booth, looking down at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You wanted me out of your life because of what I do, but you're about to discover that what I do is also what keeps you safe. Try to remember that when you're judging me. He was gone before I could respond, leaving me alone with cold coffee and impossible decisions. Through the diner window, I watched his car pull away into the Manhattan night, and I thought about a different version of myself from 4 years ago. Younger, more naive, still believing that love could change people fundamentally. That version had been wrong about many things, but maybe not about everything. Because sitting there in that run-down diner, I finally understood the truth I'd been avoiding. Lorenzo De Luca was never going to change. He was never going to become the kind of man who lived within the law, who solved problems through proper channels, who didn't carry the weight of violence in every decision. But he was Matteo's father, and maybe, just maybe, That was something I had to learn to accept, even if I could never truly forgive it. I made my decision at 3 a.m., staring at the water stain on my ceiling while Matteo slept peacefully in his small bedroom. The apartment was quiet except for the usual nocturnal sounds. The couple upstairs arguing, Mrs. Chen's television murmuring through the wall, the distant wail of sirens that was the constant soundtrack of the city. But beneath those familiar noises, I'd become aware of something new. The deliberate tread of footsteps in the hallway outside my door, pausing every 20 minutes in a pattern too regular to be coincidental. Lorenzo had stationed guards outside my apartment, despite my refusal of his protection. The realization should have infuriated me, probably would have under different circumstances. Instead, I felt a complicated mix of resentment and reluctant gratitude. Someone was watching us. Someone had made Matteo a target, and pride couldn't protect him from that reality. I called Lorenzo at dawn, before I could second-guess myself into paralysis. "I'll move," I said without preamble when he answered, "but I have conditions." "I'm listening." His voice was clear, alert. He'd been awake too, probably never slept. "I keep working. Maybe not at the cafe, but something. I need to support myself, need Matteo to see that independence matters." I took a breath. "I want separate apartments. Real separation. Not you next door, not you having keys, not you walking in whenever you want. You want to see Matteo, you ask first. Like any other co-parent." "Agreed." The easy acceptance surprised me. "And you don't make decisions about him without consulting me. Medical stuff, school, everything. We discuss it first. Equal say." "On most things," Lorenzo amended. "But when it comes to security, I make the final call. That's not negotiable, Julia. If I see a threat, I act on it. I won't wait for committee approval to protect my son." "Our son," I almost corrected. But the possessiveness in his voice stopped me. Lorenzo had missed 4 years. I couldn't expect him to immediately think in terms of shared custody when he was still processing the fact that he was a father at all. "Fine," I conceded. "Security is your domain. Everything else we decide together. There's one more condition." His tone shifted, becoming more careful. "I want paternity legally established. DNA test, paperwork, everything official. Not because I doubt you," he added quickly, "but because if something happens to me, I need Matteo protected. That means being legally recognized as my son and heir." Heir. The word carried weight. I didn't want to examine too closely. Implications of wealth and power and inheritance. Of Matteo being drawn into Lorenzo's world in ways I'd spent 4 years trying to prevent. "Okay," I agreed, because what choice did I have? "When do we do this?" "Today. I'll have Dr. Ferreira arrange the test this morning." He paused. "And Julia, thank you for trusting me this much. I know it's not easy." The vulnerability in his voice undid something in me, some last defensive wall I'd been clinging to. "I'm not doing this for you, Lorenzo. I'm doing it for him. Don't forget that." "I won't." The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity that felt like being caught in Lorenzo's orbit again, that particular gravity he generated that pulled everything into alignment with his plans. The DNA test was processed with suspicious speed, the results delivered within 24 hours instead of the usual week. The apartment Lorenzo had promised turned out to be a corner unit on the 20th floor of a building in Tribeca, 3 bedrooms with floor-to-ceiling windows, and a kitchen that looked like something from a magazine. "It's too much," I said when he first showed it to me. Matteo's hand clasped in mine, while my son stared around with wide eyes at the expanse of space. "It's adequate," Lorenzo corrected. "The master bedroom is yours. Matteo's room is next to yours with a connecting door so you can hear him at night. The 3rd bedroom can be an office or whatever you need." "What's that?" Matteo asked, pointing to a door I hadn't noticed yet. "Panic room," Lorenzo said casually, as if every apartment came equipped with one. "Reinforced walls, separate air supply, direct line to security. If there's ever any trouble, your mama takes you in there and locks the door. Nothing gets through it." I wanted to argue that panic rooms were excessive, that he was overreacting, that we didn't need this level of security. But the memory of those threatening messages stopped the words in my throat. Someone was watching. Someone had made us targets. And whatever else Lorenzo was, he understood danger in ways I never would. "Can I see my room?" Matteo asked, already tugging toward the hallway. "Of course." Lorenzo led the way, and I watched as he opened the door to a bedroom that was easily 3 times the size of the space Matteo had been sleeping in. The walls were painted a soft blue, and there was a brand new bed with a dinosaur-themed comforter already made up. A bookshelf held what looked like every dinosaur book ever published, and in the corner sat a toy box filled with carefully selected toys. Matteo's delighted gasp said everything. He released my hand and ran into the room, immediately gravitating toward the toys with the single-minded focus only a 4-year-old could manage. "When did you do all this?" I asked Lorenzo quietly, watching my son's joy with a complicated twist in my chest. "Yesterday. I had Elena coordinate it. She has a son about Matteo's age, knows what kids like." He glanced at me. "If anything's wrong, if he doesn't like something, it can be changed." "It's perfect. That's the problem. It's all perfect, like a movie set of what a child's room should be." I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. "You can't just buy his affection, Lorenzo." "I'm not trying to buy anything. I'm trying to give him what he deserves. What you've been struggling to provide because I wasn't there." His expression hardened slightly. "Let me do this, Julia. Let me give him the childhood he should have had from the beginning." The guilt in his words was unmistakable, and it deflated my anger more effectively than any argument could have. Lorenzo was trying in the only way he knew how, with resources, with protection, with the material comforts that had always been his love language. "Mama, look!" Matteo held up a stuffed velociraptor, his face lit with pure joy. "It's perfect. Can we stay here? Please?" I met Lorenzo's gaze over our son's head, seeing the hope he was trying to hide, the vulnerability of a man who'd never had to ask for anything, now waiting for my approval. "Yes, baby," I said softly. "We can stay." The move happened quickly. A team of professional movers packed up my apartment in hours, transporting my modest possessions to the Tribeca space where they looked shabby and out of place against the expensive finishes. But I insisted on keeping my furniture, my dishes, the worn couch where I'd rocked Matteo through countless nights. They were mine, earned through my own work, and I needed that reminder that I hadn't always depended on Lorenzo's generosity. Fernanda came to help me unpack, her eyes widening as she took in the apartment. "Julia, this place is. I mean, it's beautiful, but—" "I know." I folded another of Matteo's shirts, adding it to the drawer in his new dresser. "It's too much. It's all too much." "Is it safe, though? What you're doing?" She lowered her voice, even though Matteo was down the hall with Mrs. Chen, who'd insisted on coming to help settle him in. "This man, the father, you said he was dangerous." "He is." I couldn't lie to her, not after 4 years of friendship. "But he's also the only person who can protect Matteo from threats I didn't even know existed. So I'm making a choice, Fernanda. Maybe not the right one, but the only one I can live with." She nodded slowly, understanding in a way only another single mother could. "Just be careful. Men like that, they're not used to sharing power. Don't lose yourself trying to make this work." Her warning echoed in my mind later that night after everyone had left, and I stood in my new kitchen, making Matteo his bedtime snack. The space was pristine, equipped with appliances I wasn't sure how to use, stocked with food I hadn't bought. It should have felt like a gift. Instead, it felt like a beautiful trap, slowly closing around me. The medication's in the master bathroom, Lorenzo said from the doorway, making me jump. I hadn't heard him enter. I had Dr. Ferreira's office send over everything he needs, plus extras in case the prescription runs out. Thank you. The words came automatically, but they felt heavy. How many times had I thanked him in the past 3 days? How many times would I need to thank him in the months and years ahead? Julia. He moved closer, his presence filling the kitchen despite his obvious attempt not to crowd me. I know this is hard for you. Accepting help, being here, all of it, but I need you to understand something. He paused, choosing his words carefully. This isn't about control. It's about responsibility. I have a son now, and that means I have obligations. To him, to you, to the future we're going to build. Whether you like it or not, we're connected now. Permanently. We were always connected, I said quietly. You just didn't know it. Something flickered in his expression. Pain, maybe, or regret. And whose fault is that? The question hung between us, sharp as a blade. We'd been dancing around it for days, this fundamental disagreement about who bore responsibility for 4 years of separation. I'd made the choice to leave, to hide my pregnancy, to raise Matteo alone. But Lorenzo had created the circumstances that made leaving feel like the only option. It doesn't matter anymore, I said finally, too tired to rehash old arguments. What matters now is Matteo, making sure he's safe, healthy, happy, and you. Lorenzo's voice softened unexpectedly. Making sure you're okay too. You've been carrying everything alone for so long, Julia. Let me help shoulder some of that weight. The offer was tempting in ways I didn't want to admit. The idea of not being the only one responsible. Of having someone else to share the endless worries and decisions that came with raising a child alone. But accepting that help meant accepting Lorenzo fully back into my life. And I wasn't sure I was ready for what that might cost me. I should get Matteo's snack to him, I said, deflecting. He needs to take his medication before bed. Lorenzo nodded, stepping aside to let me pass. But as I moved past him, he spoke again, his voice low enough that I almost missed it. I never stopped thinking about you, you know, after you left. I told myself you were better off, that I should let you go. But I never stopped wondering where you were, if you were okay, if maybe someday. He didn't finish the sentence, and I didn't ask him to. Because whatever Lorenzo had been hoping for 4 years ago, whatever future he'd imagined for us, it was gone now. Replaced by this complicated present where we were bound together by the child sleeping down the hall and by threats neither of us fully understood yet. Later, after Matteo was asleep with his new velociraptor clutched to his chest, I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows in my bedroom, looking out at the Manhattan skyline glittering below. From this height, the city looked beautiful, orderly. Nothing like the chaotic reality I knew existed at street level. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. My stomach clenched, expecting another threat. Instead, you made the right choice. The boy is safer now. But stay vigilant, Julia. Not all threats come from outside. Sometimes the greatest danger is the one you invite into your home. I stared at the message, trying to parse its meaning. A warning? A threat? Or just another manipulation from whoever was playing this game with our lives? In the end, it didn't matter. I'd made my choice, and there was no going back now. For better or worse, Lorenzo De Luca was part of our lives again, and I would have to find a way to navigate this new reality while protecting both Matteo and whatever remained of my own independence. Outside my window, the city continued its endless dance of light and shadow, indifferent to the small human dramas playing out in its towers and streets. And somewhere in that vast urban sprawl, someone was watching, waiting to see what we would do next. I just hoped I was strong enough for whatever came next. 3 weeks into our new life, I discovered that Lorenzo's version of co-parenting involved significantly more contact than I'd anticipated. He appeared at breakfast most mornings, bringing fresh pastries from a bakery in Little Italy that reminded him of his grandmother's kitchen. He attended every one of Matteo's medical appointments, asking Dr. Ferreira detailed questions that revealed he'd been studying pediatric asthma, with the same intensity he probably brought to his business dealings. And he'd somehow convinced Matteo that bedtime stories were better when they came from Papa Lorenzo, a nickname my son had adopted with disturbing speed. I tried to maintain boundaries, to preserve the separation I'd insisted upon, but Lorenzo had a way of making himself indispensable, of filling spaces I hadn't realized were empty until he occupied them. "You don't have to be here every day," I said one morning after he'd let himself into the apartment using a key I hadn't known he possessed. We had an agreement about boundaries. "I'm not here every day," Lorenzo corrected mildly, setting down a bag from the bakery. "Yesterday I had business in Philadelphia. The day before that I was tied up with meetings until past midnight. I'm here when I can be, which isn't nearly as often as I'd like." The casual way he referenced business set my teeth on edge. 3 weeks of proximity hadn't dulled my awareness of what Lorenzo really did, the world he inhabited beyond these morning visits and bedtime stories. If anything, my consciousness of it had sharpened. I'd caught fragments of phone conversations conducted in rapid Italian, noticed the way Federico and other men in expensive suits occasionally appeared at odd hours, observed the particular tension that settled over Lorenzo when certain names were mentioned. "Mama, can Papa Lorenzo take me to the park today?" Matteo appeared in his dinosaur pajamas, already gravitating toward Lorenzo with the easy affection of a child who'd never learned to be wary. "I have to work," I said, glancing at the clock. I'd taken a new position at a small accounting firm in Midtown, something Lorenzo had arranged through his network of connections, though he'd tried to make it seem like I'd found it on my own merit. The hours were reasonable, the pay decent, and the owners didn't ask uncomfortable questions about my sudden career shift after 4 years serving coffee. "I can take him," Lorenzo offered immediately. "The park is 2 blocks away. Federico will be with us. He'll be completely safe." "It's not about safety. It's about—" I trailed off, unsure how to articulate my real concern. That Matteo was bonding with Lorenzo too quickly, that my son was becoming attached to a man whose lifestyle might require him to disappear at any moment, that I was losing the singular importance in my child's life that had defined me for 4 years. "It's about you wanting to be the only parent he needs," Lorenzo finished quietly, his perception cutting through my unspoken fears. "But Julia, that's not fair to him, or to me. I've missed 4 years already. Don't ask me to miss more because you're uncomfortable sharing him." The words stung because they were true. I had gotten used to being Matteo's entire world, to making every decision, to being the only person he turned to for comfort and security. Sharing that role felt like losing something essential, even though I knew intellectually that having 2 parents who loved him should be a gift, not a threat. "Fine," I conceded, telling myself I was doing this for Matteo's benefit, not because Lorenzo had outmaneuvered me again. "But he needs to be home by 2 for his nap." "Understood." Lorenzo's small smile of victory was infuriating. I left them making plans for their park adventure and headed to work, trying to ignore the complicated knot of emotions in my chest. The accounting firm was everything Lorenzo had promised. Professional, stable, with absolutely no connection to his other business interests. My coworkers were friendly but not intrusive, my boss demanding but fair. It was the kind of job I'd imagined having when I first graduated, before Lorenzo and pregnancy and survival had derailed all my careful plans. "Julia, can you review these quarterly statements?" My supervisor, Patricia, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, dropped a file on my desk. "The client wants them verified before their board meeting next week." I immersed myself in numbers, finding comfort in their predictability. Debits and credits, assets and liabilities. Everything balanced eventually, unlike the messy complications of human relationships. For several hours, I could forget about threatening messages and complicated co-parenting, and the way Lorenzo's presence had disrupted the carefully controlled life I'd built. My phone buzzed just before lunch. Not Lorenzo. An unknown number again. My stomach clenched as I opened the message. Your son looks happy at the park. The blue jacket suits him. Lorenzo seems like an attentive father. It's almost touching, really, how quickly he's adapted to domestic life. Makes one wonder if he's told you yet about the Rostov situation, or whether he plans to keep hiding that particular complication until it's too late. Ice flooded through my veins. I immediately pulled up the security camera app Lorenzo had insisted I install, the one that connected to the cameras throughout our building and could also access feeds from Federico's phone. It took me 3 tries to remember the password, my fingers shaking too badly to type correctly. There. The park, 2 blocks from our building. I could see Matteo on the playground equipment, his blue jacket, the new one Lorenzo had bought him last week, bright against the climbing structure. Lorenzo stood nearby, his attention completely focused on our son, while Federico maintained a watchful position several feet away. They looked safe. Normal, like any father taking his child to the park on a weekday morning. But someone was watching. Someone close enough to see Matteo's jacket color, to observe Lorenzo's attentiveness, to document their interaction. I forwarded the message to Lorenzo, then grabbed my coat and purse. Patricia, I need to leave. Family emergency. Is everything okay? I don't know yet. The subway ride back to Tribeca felt interminable. Every stop an eternity while my mind spun worst-case scenarios. What was the Rostov situation? Who was watching my son at the park? And why did the message's tone feel more informative than threatening? As if whoever was contacting me wanted me to know something Lorenzo was hiding. I arrived at the park breathless, my gaze immediately finding Matteo still playing happily, while Lorenzo pushed him on the swings. Federico spotted me first, his expression shifting to alert concern as I approached. Julia? What's wrong? Lorenzo was already moving toward me, reading the panic in my face. I showed him the message, watching as his expression went cold and dangerous. Federico, perimeter check. Now, full sweep. He pulled his own phone out, speaking rapidly to someone in Italian, additional security probably, converging on our location. What's the Rostov situation? I demanded, keeping my voice low so Matteo wouldn't hear. What haven't you told me? Lorenzo's jaw tightened. Not here. We'll discuss it at home, after Matteo's settled. No, we'll discuss it now. You promised me no more secrets, Lorenzo. You said we'd make decisions together. And we will, but some conversations can't happen in a public park where anyone might be listening. He glanced toward where Matteo was now climbing the jungle gym, oblivious to the tension between the adults. Please, Julia. Trust me enough to wait until we're somewhere secure. The plea in his voice undermined my anger. I nodded reluctantly, and we gathered Matteo, who protested leaving the park early, and returned to the building under what felt like military escort. Federico and 3 other men I didn't recognize flanked us, their presence making other pedestrians step aside. Back in the apartment, with Matteo distracted by a new dinosaur documentary, Lorenzo and I faced each other in the kitchen. His expression was grim, controlled, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands flexed as if wanting to hit something. The Rostov family is a Russian organization, he began without preamble. They've been trying to expand into territory I control for the past 2 years. 3 months ago, there was an incident, an attempt to intimidate one of my business partners that resulted in collateral damage. Civilians caught in the crossfire. I responded, definitively. Since then, things have been quiet. I thought the matter was settled. But it's not. Apparently not. He pulled up something on his phone, then showed me what looked like surveillance photos. These were delivered to my office yesterday. Pictures of you leaving work, of Mateo at his school, of Mrs. Chen bringing him home. Someone's been documenting your routines, creating a timeline of vulnerabilities. Fear turned my blood to ice. And you didn't tell me? I increased security immediately, put additional men on rotation, installed new systems, started monitoring all communication in and out of the building. His voice was controlled, professional, but his eyes betrayed him. There was genuine fear there, carefully masked, but unmistakable. I was handling it, Julia. Quietly, without alarming you unnecessarily. Handling it by keeping me in the dark, by letting me think we were safe when someone's been photographing my son. The betrayal cut deeper than any threat. You promised transparency, Lorenzo. You promised we'd make decisions together. I promised to keep him safe. That's exactly what I'm doing. By lying to me again. My voice rose despite my efforts to contain it. By deciding what I need to know, what I can handle, what information I'm capable of processing. That's the same pattern, Lorenzo. That's exactly what drove me away 4 years ago. And you're doing it again. He flinched as if I'd struck him. It's not the same. I'm not hiding my business from you. I'm protecting you from specific threats while I neutralize them. There's no difference. Don't you see that? Every time you make a unilateral decision about our safety, about what I should or shouldn't know, you're treating me like I'm incapable of being a real partner in this. I moved closer, needing him to understand. I left my entire life behind to move here, Lorenzo. I accepted your help, your protection, your involvement in Mateo's life. But I can't do this if you're going to keep treating me like a civilian who needs to be managed instead of a co-parent who deserves the truth. The silence that followed felt charged, dangerous. Lorenzo's expression cycled through several emotions: anger, frustration, something that might have been shame, before settling into resignation. You're right, he said finally, the admission clearly costing him. I'm accustomed to handling problems alone, to controlling information flow, to making executive decisions without consultation. It's how I've survived this long. He paused. But that's not what you need from me. And it's not what Mateo needs either. The acknowledgement should have satisfied me. Instead, it raised new questions. Can you actually change? Or are you just telling me what I want to hear until the next crisis comes along? I don't know, Lorenzo admitted, his honesty more unsettling than any reassurance would have been. But I'm willing to try. For him. For us. Before I could respond, Federico appeared in the kitchen doorway, his expression urgent. Boss, we have a situation. The security team found something. We followed him to the building's security office, a room I hadn't known existed, tucked away on the ground floor behind an unmarked door. Inside, multiple monitors showed feeds from cameras throughout the building and surrounding area. A man in his 30s with military bearing gestured to one screen. Third monitor, top right. Camera covering the service entrance. Look at the timestamp. This morning, while you were at the park. I watched as a figure in maintenance coveralls entered through the service door, using a key card that apparently granted access. The person moved efficiently toward the elevator banks, head down to avoid clear camera angles. We don't have anyone scheduled for maintenance today, the security chief explained. And that key card was reported stolen 3 days ago. We've been monitoring for unauthorized use. Where did they go? Lorenzo's voice was dangerously calm. The security chief switched to different camera angles, tracking the figure's movement through the building. My breath caught when they stopped outside a 20th floor apartment. Mine. On screen, the figure produced lock-picking tools and efficiently opened my door, disappearing inside for exactly 4 minutes before re-emerging and retracing their steps out of the building. What were they doing in there? I whispered, horror replacing my earlier anger. Lorenzo was already moving, speaking rapid commands into his phone. Frederico, take Julia to the safe room. Activate full lockdown protocol. No one enters or leaves the building until we've cleared every floor. Wait. Mateo's still in the apartment. Panic clawed at my throat. Mrs. Chen is with him. They'll be moved to a secure location immediately. Lorenzo's hand closed around my arm, firm, but not painful. Julia, I need you to go with Frederico now. Let me handle this. No. I pulled away from his grip. If someone was in my apartment, in Mateo's space, I need to see what they did. I need to know what we're dealing with. It could be dangerous. Then we'll be careful. But I'm not hiding in a safe room while you handle everything. That's exactly what we were just arguing about. I met his gaze steadily. Either we're partners in this, or we're not. Decide. Something in Lorenzo's expression shifted. Respect, maybe, or recognition of his own words being used against him. Fine. But you stay behind me. And if I tell you to run, you run. No arguments. Agreed. We took the elevator up together, surrounded by 4 armed men who'd appeared from wherever Lorenzo kept his security detail. The ride felt interminable, my mind spinning with terrible possibilities. What had someone done in my apartment? Left a bomb? Planted surveillance equipment? Taken something? The apartment door looked undisturbed. Lorenzo's team swept the space with practiced efficiency, checking every room, every closet, every potential hiding place. I waited in the hallway, my heart hammering, until one of them gave the all-clear signal. No devices found. No signs of tampering with existing security systems. But there's something in the master bedroom. We entered to find my room exactly as I'd left it that morning. Bed made, clothes put away, nothing obviously disturbed. Then one of the security team pointed to my nightstand. There, arranged in a neat line, were 5 photographs. Recent ones, high quality, taken with a professional camera. The first showed me leaving for work 3 days ago. The second captured Mateo's school pickup. The third was Lorenzo at the park with our son, taken from an angle that suggested a telephoto lens from a distance. The fourth showed the 3 of us returning to the building after dinner last week. A family moment I hadn't known anyone was documenting. The 5th photograph made my blood run cold. It was Lorenzo, but not in any context I recognized. He was younger in this image, maybe 5 years ago, standing beside a man I'd never seen before. And in the background, barely visible but unmistakable, was the body of someone lying on concrete, a dark pool spreading beneath them. Taped to the photograph was a note in neat block letters. Ask him about Mikhail Rostov. Ask him what really started this war. Lorenzo's face had gone completely blank. The particular emptiness that meant he was working hard to control his reaction. He picked up the photograph, studied it for a long moment, then set it down with careful precision. Everyone out, he said quietly. Julia and I need to talk. Privately. The security team filed out, leaving us alone with the evidence of someone's surveillance, someone's access to our most private spaces, someone's knowledge of Lorenzo's past. Mikhail Rostov, I said, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. Tell me. Lorenzo sank onto the edge of my bed, the photograph still in his hand. For a long moment, he didn't speak, and I wondered if he was going to deflect, to protect me from this truth, the way he protected me from everything else. Then he began to talk, and I learned exactly what kind of man I'd tied my life and my son's future to. Mikhail Rostov was 23 years old, Lorenzo said, his voice flat, devoid of the emotion I could see carefully controlled in his expression. He was Ivan Rostov's youngest son, not involved in the family business, not part of the organization. He wanted to be a doctor, was studying at Columbia, had a scholarship, a girlfriend, a future that had nothing to do with his father's world. I remained standing, unable to sit, unable to do anything but listen as Lorenzo finally spoke truth I'd been dreading for years. 5 years ago, there was a territorial dispute. Ivan wanted to expand into shipping operations I controlled. I refused his overtures. He persisted. I made it clear that persistence would have consequences. Lorenzo's hands tightened on the photograph. One night, 3 of his men ambushed one of my warehouses, killed 2 of my people, destroyed $500,000 in legitimate merchandise. It was a declaration of war. And Mikhail, I whispered, was in the wrong place at the wrong time. He'd gone to meet someone, a girl, we learned later, someone he was seeing who lived near one of Ivan's operations. My people were conducting a retaliatory strike. Mikhail saw something he shouldn't have, tried to intervene, to reason with them. Lorenzo finally looked up at me. He was killed in the crossfire, collateral damage, an accident. An accident you allowed to happen. An accident that occurred because his father started a war. Lorenzo's voice hardened. I gave Ivan multiple opportunities to back down, multiple warnings that escalation would have costs. He ignored them all. And yes, when my people moved against his operations, I knew there was risk of civilian casualties. I accepted that risk. The admission hung between us, sharp and irrevocable. This was the truth I'd been avoiding, the reality of Lorenzo's world spelled out in the death of an innocent person whose only crime was being related to the wrong man. And now Ivan wants revenge, I said, the pieces falling into place. These messages, the photographs, someone breaking into my apartment, it's him. He's showing you that he knows about Matteo, that he can reach us whenever he wants. Yes. Lorenzo set the photograph down carefully, as if it might shatter. Ivan lost his son because of me. Now he wants me to understand what that loss feels like. He wants me to live with the fear that Matteo might be taken from me the same way Mikhail was taken from him. Except Matteo isn't collateral damage. He's a specific target, which actually makes it more dangerous. Lorenzo stood, his movement restless, predatory. Collateral damage is usually accidental, a consequence of proximity to violence. But deliberate targeting is different. It's premeditated, planned, personal. Ivan isn't going to hurt Matteo accidentally during some larger operation. He's going to hurt him specifically because he's mine. The weight of that reality pressed down on me until I could barely breathe. This was what I'd feared from the beginning. Not the abstract danger of Lorenzo's lifestyle, but the concrete threat of enemies who would use my child as a weapon against his father. So what do we do? I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. Run? Hide? Spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders? No. Lorenzo's voice carried absolute certainty. We end this. Permanently. What does that mean? He moved toward me, his expression intense. It means I go to Ivan. I offer him what he actually wants. Which is? Me. The simple word carried terrible weight. Ivan doesn't want money, doesn't want territory. He wants me to suffer the way he's suffered. So I offer him the opportunity to do exactly that. Understanding dawned with horrifying clarity. You're going to let him kill you. I'm going to negotiate a trade. My life in exchange for permanent peace. Guaranteed protection for you and Matteo. Signed agreements witnessed by neutral parties. His word and honor on the line. Lorenzo's hands came to rest on my shoulders, his grip firm. It's the only way to ensure you're both truly safe. No. The word burst out of me. Absolutely not. You don't get to play martyr now, Lorenzo. Matteo just found you. He needs his father, not some tragic sacrifice. He needs to be alive. Lorenzo's voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. And right now, as long as I'm in his life, that's uncertain. But if I remove myself from the equation, if Ivan gets the revenge he's seeking, then Matteo becomes irrelevant to this conflict. he'll be safe. You don't know that. What if Ivan isn't satisfied with just you? What if he decides he wants everything? You and us? Then I don't make the trade. Lorenzo's hands moved from my shoulders to frame my face, forcing me to meet his eyes. But I think I know Ivan. We've been adversaries for 15 years, long before Mikhail's death. He's a man of honor in his own way. If I give him what he wants, if I bow to his demands publicly enough that his reputation is restored, he'll keep his word about leaving you alone. You're gambling with your life based on a 15-year-old rivalry and some outdated notion of honor among thieves. I pulled away from his touch, needing distance to think clearly. What about what Matteo wants? Don't you think he deserves a say in whether his father commits suicide by negotiation? He's 4 years old. He doesn't understand. He understands that he finally has a father who reads him stories and takes him to the park and makes him feel safe. Tears burned in my eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. You don't get to take that away from him just because you feel guilty about something that happened 5 years ago. It's not about guilt. Lorenzo's voice roughened with emotion he usually kept buried. It's about mathematics. Ivan will keep escalating until he achieves his objective. The photographs, the break-in, the messages, they're all steps in a progression. Eventually, he'll move from psychological warfare to physical action. And when he does, Matteo will be in the crossfire. So we fight. We increase security. We change our routines. We do whatever it takes to stay ahead of him. For how long? Lorenzo's question hung in the air between us. A year? 5 years? The rest of Matteo's childhood? You want him to grow up constantly watched, constantly afraid, never able to have a normal life because his father's enemy is always out there waiting. The terrible logic of his argument undermined my protests. Because he was right. Living under constant threat wasn't sustainable. Matteo deserved better than that. But he also deserved his father. There has to be another way, I insisted. Some option that doesn't involve you sacrificing yourself. If there is, I haven't found it. Lorenzo's expression softened slightly. Believe me, Julia, if there was any other solution that guaranteed your safety, and Matteo's, I would take it. But I've spent the past 3 days considering every alternative, running every scenario. This is the only outcome where I'm certain you both survive. A sound from the doorway made us both turn. Matteo stood there in his dinosaur pajamas, his small face confused and worried. Mama, why are you crying? I hadn't realized tears were falling until my son pointed them out. I quickly wiped them away, forcing a smile. Everything's okay, baby. Mama just got some dust in her eyes. Papa Lorenzo looked sad too. Matteo's observation was accurate. Lorenzo's expression, usually so controlled, had cracked enough that even a 4-year-old could read the emotion there. Come here, Figlio, Lorenzo said, kneeling to Matteo's level. The Italian endearment, son, came naturally now, as if Lorenzo had been saying it for years instead of weeks. Matteo approached cautiously, his gaze moving between the two adults. Are you fighting? We're having a disagreement, Lorenzo said carefully. Sometimes grown-ups don't agree about the best way to handle things, but it's going to be okay. Promise? The simple question hit like a physical blow. I watched Lorenzo's expression shift, saw the war happening behind his eyes as he wrestled with whether to lie to his son or admit that some promises couldn't be kept. I promise that your mama and I will do everything we can to keep you safe and happy, Lorenzo said finally, the careful wording a compromise between truth and comfort. No matter what. Matteo seemed satisfied with this answer, his attention already shifting to more immediate concerns. Can we have pancakes for breakfast? Yes, I said quickly, grateful for the return to normalcy. Go wash your hands and I'll start making them. After Matteo scampered off toward the bathroom, Lorenzo and I faced each other again. The moment of domestic interruption had given us both time to recalibrate, to step back from the emotional edge we'd been teetering on. "I'm not agreeing to this," I said quietly. "I'm not signing off on your martyr plan, Lorenzo. We'll find another way. And if we don't, if Ivan forces the issue before we find an alternative, then we deal with it together, as partners, the way we agreed." I moved closer, needing him to understand. "You keep trying to solve problems by taking all the burden on yourself. But that's not what being a father means. It's not what being a family means. You don't get to make unilateral decisions anymore, no matter how noble your intentions." Something in Lorenzo's expression cracked, revealing the vulnerability beneath his armor of control. "I don't know how to do this, Julia. I've spent my entire adult life making decisions alone, carrying the weight of consequences by myself. I don't know how to share that burden." "Then learn." I reached up, touching his face the way I used to years ago when things between us were simpler. "You demanded I trust you enough to move here, to let you into Mateo's life. Now I'm demanding the same trust from you. Believe that we can handle the truth together. Believe that I'm strong enough to be a real partner instead of just someone you protect." "I've never doubted your strength." His hand came up to cover mine where it rested against his face. "That's not the issue. The issue is that my world, my choices, my enemies, they put you in danger just by existing. How do I reconcile being in your life with keeping you safe when those two things are fundamentally incompatible?" "Maybe they're not as incompatible as you think." I pulled my hand back, needing to say this clearly. "Yes, your life comes with risks. Yes, knowing you makes me and Mateo targets. But Lorenzo, we were already targets the moment I got pregnant with your child. Running away, hiding, pretending you didn't exist. None of that actually protected us. It just left us vulnerable in different ways. You're saying you're safer with me than without me. I'm saying Mateo deserves his father. And maybe I deserve a second chance at the future we didn't get to build the first time. The admission cost me, but I pushed through the fear of being vulnerable. I'm not the same person I was 4 years ago. I'm not naive about what you do or who you are. But I'm also not willing to give up on this, on us, just because it's complicated and dangerous." Lorenzo stared at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. "You're saying you want to try again. Actually, try to build something together." "I'm saying I'm tired of running from the impossible choice between loving you and protecting my son. Maybe there's a way to do both if we're smart about it, if we're honest with each other, if we actually work together instead of you making all the decisions." "That's a lot of ifs, Julia." "Welcome to parenting," I said with a small smile. "Everything's uncertain. You do your best and hope it's enough." Before Lorenzo could respond, my phone buzzed with another message. We both tensed, but this time it wasn't from an unknown number. It was Dr. Ferreira. "Reminder, Mateo's follow-up appointment tomorrow at 10 a.m. Please confirm." The mundane normalcy of the message was somehow more powerful than any declaration we could have made. This was our reality now, navigating death threats and breakfast routines, negotiating with enemies while confirming doctor appointments, building a family in the spaces between danger. "I'll be there," Lorenzo said, reading the message over my shoulder. "At the appointment. If that's okay." "It's more than okay." I confirmed the appointment, then turned to face him fully. "But Lorenzo, if we're doing this, actually trying to be a family, then I need you to promise me something. Anything. Don't make decisions about sacrificing yourself or negotiating with Ivan or anything else that affects our future without talking to me first. Even if you think you're protecting us. Even if every instinct says to handle it alone. Promise me we'll face whatever comes next together." Lorenzo was quiet for a long moment, and I could see the war happening behind his eyes. This was what I was asking him to surrender. Not his power or his resources, or even his dangerous business, but his fundamental approach to solving problems through solitary decision-making. "I promise to try," he said finally. "I can't guarantee I won't fall back into old patterns, especially in crisis situations. But I promise to try to include you, to trust you with the full truth, to make decisions together. For Mateo, and for us." It wasn't the absolute guarantee I'd hoped for, but it was honest, and honesty mattered more than false promises. I nodded, accepting the compromise. "Mama, I'm ready for pancakes," Mateo called from the kitchen, "and Papa Lorenzo said he knows how to make them shaped like dinosaurs." I raised an eyebrow at Lorenzo, who had the grace to look slightly sheepish. I may have overestimated my cooking abilities. I can barely make regular pancakes. Then I guess it's a good thing I actually know what I'm doing in a kitchen. I moved past him toward where our son was waiting, then paused in the doorway. "Come on, Papa Lorenzo. Time to learn one of the essential parenting skills, making promises to your kid that you have no idea how to keep, then figuring it out as you go." Lorenzo followed me into the kitchen, and for the next hour, we existed in a bubble of domestic normalcy. Flour on the counter, Mateo's delighted laughter as Lorenzo's first attempt at a dinosaur pancake looked more like a deformed blob, the simple joy of being together without the weight of threats and impossible choices pressing down on us. It wouldn't last, I knew. Ivan Rostov was still out there, still planning his next move. The danger hadn't disappeared just because we'd had an honest conversation. But for this moment, in this kitchen, making dinosaur pancakes for our son, we were just a family trying to find our way forward. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. 6 months later, I stood at the same floor-to-ceiling windows in our Tribeca apartment, watching Mateo play in the building's private rooftop garden 3 stories above us. The security cameras gave me a clear view of him chasing butterflies with the single-minded determination only a 5-year-old could muster. Lorenzo sat on a nearby bench, his attention split between his phone and our son, the multitasking he'd perfected in his new role as present father. Things hadn't been easy. Ivan Rostov had tested us twice more, once with the attempted kidnapping that Frederico's team had intercepted before it got within 50 feet of Mateo, once with a bombing of one of Lorenzo's warehouses that had been devastating financially but resulted in no casualties. Each time, Lorenzo had wanted to handle it alone, to shield me from the details. And each time, I'd insisted on knowing everything, on being part of the decision-making process, on refusing to be relegated to the role of protected civilian. Eventually, Lorenzo and Ivan had reached a different kind of agreement. Not the martyrdom Lorenzo had initially proposed, but a negotiated truce facilitated by neutral parties who had stakes in ending the conflict. Territorial concessions, financial reparations, and a formal acknowledgement of Mikhail's death that stopped short of admission, but satisfied Ivan's need for public recognition of his loss. It wouldn't last forever. Men like Lorenzo and Ivan existed in a world where truces were temporary, and peace was always conditional. But for now, it was enough. "Mama, watch," Mateo's voice crackled through the intercom system. "I caught a butterfly." I smiled, watching him cup his small hands carefully around something I couldn't see from this distance. "That's wonderful, baby. But remember to let it go. Butterflies need to be free." He released whatever he'd caught, and I saw the flutter of wings as it escaped toward the sky. My phone buzzed with a message from Fernanda, asking if we wanted to meet at the park next weekend. She and her kids had become regular fixtures in our new life, one of the few constants I'd carried over from my old existence. I replied confirming, then returned my attention to the window. Lorenzo looked up suddenly, his gaze finding the camera as if he could feel me watching. He smiled, not the controlled mask he showed the world, but the genuine expression I'd learned to recognize as reserved for me and Mateo. Then he lifted his phone, typing something quickly. My phone buzzed again. "Dinner tonight? Just the 3 of us. I'll cook." "You don't cook," I replied. "I can learn." Isn't that what you said? Figuring it out as we go? I smiled, warmth spreading through my chest in a way that had become familiar over these months. We weren't perfect. We weren't even entirely safe. But we were trying, building something real in the spaces between danger and domesticity. Dinosaur-shaped pasta? I texted back. Don't push your luck. I'm starting with spaghetti and working up to complex shapes. Later that evening, after Matteo had gone to bed with a full stomach and Lorenzo's latest bedtime story, I found Lorenzo on the rooftop again. The city glittered below us, endless lights marking millions of lives being lived in the urban sprawl. I've been thinking about something, he said, as I joined him at the railing. About the future, about what we're building here. And I want to make it official. Not just co-parenting, not just living in the same building and raising Matteo together. He turned to face me fully. I want us to be a family, really be one, with all the complications and commitments that entails. My breath caught. Lorenzo, I'm not asking you to marry me, he interrupted quickly. Not yet. I know we're still rebuilding trust, still learning how to be partners in this. But I want you to know that's where I'm heading. Toward a future where this isn't temporary or conditional. Toward us. I looked at him. This complicated, dangerous, surprisingly tender man who'd upended my carefully controlled life and forced me to confront truths I'd been avoiding for 4 years. I can't promise it'll be easy. I don't need easy. I just need you to be willing to try. Then yes, I said, the decision feeling both terrifying and inevitable. I'm willing to try. For Matteo, and for us. Lorenzo pulled me close, and I let myself lean into him. Let myself accept the comfort and strength he offered. We stood there for a long time, watching the city, feeling the future stretch out before us, uncertain, complicated, but finally, tentatively ours to build together. Inside, Matteo slept peacefully, safe under the protection of his father's resources and his mother's fierce love. And for now, for this moment, that was enough.